All right, thank you, KM, thank you, Tom, and Jason, Sheena, and Chris for your comments. Now I'm going to invite up the last panel for the conference, and you'll all, of course, love this panel because at the end is when we're going to hear who the winners are for the Coleman Pitch Competition. So I will invite up to the stage now Mike Hennessy, president of the Coleman Foundation, Dr. Angeline Godwin, president of Patrick Henry Community College, and also Sara Whiffen with Insights Ignited. Okay, so just to set the stage for this panel, I want to talk about a few things that just came up, some themes that came up from the last panel. So one thing in particular I was thinking about, Tom, when you said that about the machine, because I think it's very true. Like, we can all just go back and get swept into that machine of, the processes of the college. And it made me think of that book, Who Moved My Cheese? Do you all remember that book from a while ago? It's a really good one to get out from time to time, and I think because we all get stuck in our little paths and how we go about things, and you can get stuck in the bureaucracies of things. And that, kind of a continuation of my story from Sunday night, one of the things that I was really on a quest for a while was to identify some principles that could be applied to what we were talking about. Because even though I love the concept of the entrepreneurial mindset, I'm thoroughly behind that and believe that, I think for all of the people in the community college whose cheese had been moved, we need a little bit more direction on what does the entrepreneurial mindset look like, how do you get that? And I became convinced that just like any behavior change, you need small actions that then lead to that change of the thought process. So as you know, the discovery for me was on the entrepreneurial method and on effectuation. And for a while I'd been talking about, I know I've shared this with a few of you, but I was talking about it with like weight loss. Because there's principles for weight loss, right? Everyone knows that you need to consume less calories than you burn. Like, that's the basics. And so you drink water, healthy food, exercise. Those are the principles. But there's a lot of weight loss programs. There's Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, Atkins. There's all sorts of ways that you can go about it. But at the core, it's really the same thing. And so I started thinking, there's got to be something about this with entrepreneurship because it's so replicative. Like, there's people that can do this over and over, so they must be following some sort of similar process, some sort of principle that we can extract. So therefore, when I found the entrepreneurial method, I was so pleased, and I talked to Mike about it. We brought Sara. Dr. Godwin was a hand raiser last year's conference. She had contacted Sara's. I had contacted Sara's, and we had decided that we would go down to Patrick Henry. So Sara and I went down to Patrick Henry. We met with their staff. We met with people from their community. And we decided, instead of just talking about the method, we needed to put it in action. And so we gave the information, and we asked them to make commitments and make some asks. We pulled some stories out of that community so we could not just have the theory of it, but to start to see it in action. Then I brought that over to you, Mike, and I said, for the next pitch competition, I would really love to see if we could align what we're asking the colleges to do if they could start to employ the entrepreneurial method. Because what NACCE wants out of it is we want the stories. We want now not just for people to say bird in hand and affordable loss and crazy quilt and all these fun words. We want to know, what is their bird in hand? Who are their stakeholders? What are their asks? What are these actions? And what changes is it actually starting to make in the community? So thankfully, like you've often done, you said, okay. And Clark, I worked with you quite a bit on this, and Rosa. And so we put together the RFP that many of you saw. I know is a lot of work, but we asked you to assess the assets that you hold, inventory them. We wanted to get a sense, what do you consider to be your assets? And many people, they wrote people, human capital that they have. You think of all the potential and all of the knowledge that's held at your community college and your faculty and your staff. And then you inventoried physical assets, meeting space, all of these things that could be something that could be used for supporting entrepreneurship. So we have that now. That's going to become part of the information that we're able to reflect back to all of you, the assets that you've put out there. And then we asked you to put together some proposals, and we asked for Coleman to fund them. So before we invite Clark up to talk a little bit more about this and announce the winners, I just wanted to have the opportunity now for you to all hear from Mike from a funding perspective, Dr. Godwin from a community college perspective, and then Sara from the perspective of someone who has been actively implementing the entrepreneurial method in some of the colleges with me, but also in corporations, within corporations, and just kind of hear some lessons learned from that so we don't have to make some of those same mistakes as we go. So with that, Mike, I just want to ask you, what's your thought or sort of your reaction on starting to change on how you might fund, especially for this year, in employing the entrepreneurial method, and what was your interest in doing so?
Well, we really have a very traditional approach to funding entrepreneurship. When we first got into this, there was so little going on, you could do almost anything, and it would have some kind of impact. And as time went on, we have really tried to become more and more targeted, to look for results, and do smaller range of things, so we can really try to compare what's going on in the space. We did grants initially in response to very creative, very energetic individuals. And that's really a lot of fun when you have an opportunity to work with those people, but the minute they leave the institution, the program goes away. So you have to try to figure out ways to bulletproof the programs that you're doing within the institutions and in the community, and make them take the ownership for what it is that you're asking them to do. The teaching ability, the focus of the effectuation program, really, it's a very, very useful resource. I think you guys have seen so much jargon, so many definitions out there. You're talking about entrepreneurial thinking, and entrepreneurial is one of my least favorite words, because anybody can be entrepreneurial about anything that you want. And I think we need to fight for a focus on that, to try to not put it in a box, but at least make sure we know what we're talking about and know what we're expecting out of that. So this it gives us a clear path. It gives us a very useful tool that doesn't become overly prescriptive. And I want to go back to something that Sheena was talking about earlier. One of my big fears is that in dealing with a lot of the people that you deal with every day in your classrooms, if you don't come up with the next big chip, some really explosive idea, I'm afraid we're turning some people off to that. And we've got areas in the city of Chicago. I'd love it if somebody opened 6 car washes in there. That'd be great. And it doesn't require the kind of resource and the same kind of background on it. So I think this particular framework allows people like that to understand what they're up against. And Jason was talking about the impediments of, actually doing it, and the things that was stopping him from getting going. If we're stopping people from starting, we've got real problems. We have to really kind of keep working on that. And I really think that Sara, a year ago, when she started talking about that, kind of challenged us all to think about things a little bit differently, and even think about how foundations are evaluating the work that we do. And I found that exciting and scary all at the same time, because we're very used to concentrating on the end game rather than the first step. And I think there's some very, 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 very useful things here.
Excellent, thank you. And then Dr. Godwin, I'm curious, because you're a college president, and college presidents have a million things to do that could take their time. What value did you see in this that was worth you not only taking your own time, but gathering community members to get behind bringing the entrepreneurial method as a way to figure a lot of things out at your community?
Well, I guess for me it resonated as being a serial entrepreneur myself, in that it actually just made sense. The whole approach to effectuation gives us a framework of how we handle and tackle and wrestle with the challenges and issues and even the opportunities that we're all wrestling with, whether it's performance funding or accreditation standards or whatever it may be. And that, having started my own businesses, run my own businesses, been a founding CEO of a new statewide organization, those startups, I was always selling something. it just made a lot of sense. It was real. And I came to a college that was for a community that had been in a very serious time. It had a lot of trauma. And, you know, it's a difference if you lose your job last week, and when I see you today, you tell me you've lost your job. But if you lost your job 15 years ago, and when I meet you for the first time, you tell me you've lost your job, and you're still in that frame. And so I just felt this overwhelming sense of urgency when I went to Patrick Henry Community College in Martinsville, Virginia, that certainly something that we knew about starting businesses and being entrepreneurs and actually co-creating our future. Those were the words that Sara used that really registered with me. What do I control, and how do we co-create our future? And I saw it was a path forward. Not a path out, but a path forward. And so really the first effectuation analysis I did was of myself as a community college president in a rural community in Southern Virginia. And it was very eye-opening, you know, to thine own self be true. And it set in the pattern that I knew that this was an area. We all do what we want to do. We all have 24 hours, and we spend those 25 hours doing what we believe makes a difference and what we really want to do. So it just made sense. It was not noble, and it was not heroic, and it's not sexy, but it was the right thing to do, and it made sense for us to take this framework and use it to start the conversations, to give people a common language. It is not academic in its terminology. It's something that everybody can understand, regardless of what your role is in that college, regardless of who you are as a student, regardless of what your role is in the community. It gave us a terminology and something to start with where we could all feel like we could find what we control and then co-create the future that we want, instead of wringing our hands and whining and crying about what we didn't have anymore and what had gone wrong.
You know, I was thinking what Chris said, too, about being blessed by poverty. And, excuse me, I think you've made that statement before. And the reason it really struck me is that whole concept of starting with what you have and actually counting that as one of the things that you have, instead of looking at that as something that you don't have, because that then spurs you to do different things if you're from that situation. And, you know, the colleges for a long time have talked about what they don't have, or in comparison to universities and things like that. I'm hearing that a little less. I think that attitude is shifting a little bit, but to think of that actually as an asset. So can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I know you're in also a very similar rural community that Chris and Megan are as well.
Yes, we have actually, this was an epiphany at this conference. We have always talked about how do we overcome the intense poverty. We have the highest unemployment in Virginia going for 6 years in a row. How do we overcome that? 17% of all the seniors in my service area, neither parent has ever held a job in their lifetime. How do we overcome that? But after the master class, we were all talking, and I have Kim Buck and Matthew Wade, and I brought in my community foundation leader and the head of our economic development, my vice president for workforce and economic development. And what we realized on the lemonade moment is that no, we're not going to talk about overcoming the poverty. We're going to embrace it, because it's that survivor mentality. We have kids, they are entrepreneurial, that they're going to figure out this morning how to get to school, how to get some food, how to find something to wear, a place to sleep, because we have kids that sleep on, they rotate sofas and neighbors and relatives. They are survivors. They use entrepreneurial principles to survive living every day. And that was a true epiphany for us, that of shifting and using that now to our advantage.
You know, again, the usefulness of this framework, we've been a supporter of NIFTY for 25 years. And to view what they do on a day-to-day basis and what you're talking about of starting with those street smarts and using those to actually create resource for yourself. This fits so well to that and gives them another way to think about that and another way to position that in the community.
Yep, that's exactly right. So Sara, I'd love to just hear a little bit from you, and I think what will be most valuable to the audience right now is you've been working with Saris for a while, and part of that is your own personal story, so you can kind of speak about that a little bit. And then also, there's interest in corporations to employ the entrepreneurial method specifically for innovation, because we know large companies are often known for maybe similar things for community colleges. You have large bureaucracies and systems set up, and it kind of squelches innovation. So you've been carving out some spaces with corporations and working with that. And I think there's something interesting about the language and kind of what happened. So could you share a little bit about yourself and then the work and things that you see?
Sure. So I came from a corporate background where I did startups for a Fortune 500 company, a large brand, and loved being in that startup environment and couldn't wait to try it on my own and be an entrepreneur in the real world, and discovered that when you're calling with your own name rather than the name of an established brand behind you, people don't throw money at you and they don't rush to pick up the phone and invite you over to pitch. So I was faced very quickly with this reality that a lot of the things I had been doing on the corporate side that were all correct in terms of entrepreneurship. I knew how to plan and strategize and do competitive benchmarking and whatnot. Didn't necessarily carry over when I was in the real world. And so where was I going to learn these skills and develop these new competencies that I was going to need to be successful on my own as an entrepreneur? And as a result of doing that, my bird in hand and my circumstances where I was living in Charlottesville, Virginia, and had the opportunity to participate in a pilot effectual incubator that Dr. Saraswati was advising. And I had my own startup idea and worked on that, and in the process started talking to her about this mindset and what she was doing, and we discovered that my corporate experience and connections with that world and the practical boots on the ground and her theoretical application kind of melded together and worked to form a partnership. So that's what we've been doing now for approximately the past 5 years or so at this point. And then to Heather's second part of the question about some of the lessons learned or the value that I see companies getting when they apply this methodology is, I think, comes down to 3 maybe more mindset or attitudinal outcomes than anything that are relevant across the board. And the first, I would say, and they all bleed together, is a sense of empowerment, a sense of confidence, and optimism. And if I can channel my inner Saris for just a minute here, she packs a lot of energy in a very small person, but if I can channel some of that when we talk about the research, and we see this consistently when it comes to the ask and asking, there is a feedback cycle as it applies to confidence and optimism. And we find that the more an entrepreneur asks, the more confident they get in asking. And the more confident they are, the more likely people are to say yes, because they believe in their idea and they're backing it with their energy and support and enthusiasm. And so the more yeses the entrepreneur gets, then what happens? The more confident they get. And so it's this spiral that we see, this self-fulfilling prophecy that moves an entrepreneur up the curve from being a startup, fledgling individual to being a competent, networked, supported entrepreneur in the community. So we see that mindset change in corporations when we work with them. And I think what I would like to see from the community college crowd, when I coach individual entrepreneurs, one of the most frequent questions I hear from them, and this can be whether they have a small business or a large nationwide tech startup, inevitably one of the number one questions is, I'm drowning in opportunity. There is an abundance of possibility, and I don't know where to turn next. Can you help me prioritize what my next step will be? And I think that would be the question I would love to hear being talked about at NACCE next year. We're a community college, and we are drowning in opportunity. What can we do next?
Excellent. So I want to talk a little bit about some things that I have observed and I believe is just a reality of change process. And so I think it's just a nice opportunity to kind of to point that out and think this is appropriate for where we are. So we introduced this idea of effectuation last year. We've written about it in the journal. You've heard about it. We've had Sara's. And you hear a lot from people on the stage. You've heard it a lot in the breakout sessions. But as I observe and I hear what they're saying, there's certain concepts that I get the sense that people are not fully understanding, in particular maybe about affordable loss. So they'll use the words, but maybe the understanding. And so that's partly why we did the pitch competition, so they would have the opportunity to actually do this in action and then report back out. But could you speak, Sara, just briefly on your work with companies as you begin to introduce these concepts and then begin to do them? What are some challenges as they go through this process?
Yeah, I think the affordable loss or the terminology example that you bring up is probably the number one challenge that we see. And the way I look at it is, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And I think that companies and large institutions tend to struggle with that. So there is a propensity to say affordable loss and burden handling, it's a little bit folksy, it's not too sophisticated in terms of wording, it doesn't come with a bunch of graphs and charts and things like that. So therefore, because I understand it, it means that it's easy to implement. And so when somebody does go out and try to be effectual and try to employ these steps and encounters difficulties, it often leaves them unsure of, hey, is it the methodology? Is it not working? Is it me? What do I do? So I think the number one challenge is accepting that just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy, and it really takes action. It takes not just understanding the concept, but putting it into practice and trying it and applying it. And you're going to encounter challenges and stumbling blocks, and that's okay. That's part of the process. It's working through those. And I always talk about this as being a marathon, not a sprint. This is setting you up for the long term. And things like affordable loss and your crazy quilt are what's going to keep you able to live another day. It's going to keep you in the entrepreneurial game for the long term and not just kind of an entrepreneurial one-hit wonder.
Well, for me, when Sara was summarizing everything and then plunked the ask right in the middle of all of it, it was like, uh-oh, I have to do something, and that's that call to action. And really, most of us that are involved in education, we don't have a lot of reason to do a lot of asks. And now we're being stretched and stretched and stretched, and the crazy quilt becomes broader and broader, and it really is, people talk about getting out of your comfort zone. That's, to me, is a little overused, but it's definitely out of my experiential zone, and I think we have opportunities here, as Sara was saying, to practice that more, and we need to look at the communities and look for resources that we haven't actually thought about using before and take advantage of the ask.
Excellent. And Dr. Godwin, I want to go and ask you to tell a little bit about the trail story. I think that will give an example of some specifics and specific asks. But before I do, so it'll give you a second there, I wanted to just mention something that you had said, Sara, about it's simple but not easy. So I wanted to just bring everyone back to the weight loss example, right? Because it's simple, but it's not easy. Everybody knows what to do, but it's not easy. And so it's really the same idea. And I also want to maybe just give another example from, seems how Tom brought up the Vatican. But I was also thinking about it initially with change, and I know we brought this up in the Coleman meeting yesterday a little bit, but almost like missionaries going into African lands and converting people, but the people never actually change their original beliefs. They just layer on the new beliefs. And so you have this amalgamation of different things. And so that's what we're also trying to prevent, or not prevent, but it's normal to be in part of this process. You're getting this new information, this new way to act, but you're in very causal environments. And so now it's like you're being asked to act more like this entrepreneur would in these environments. And so it'll be muddy and it'll be a little chaotic for a while. And I think you're going to see this from even the results of the pitch competition and us working with the colleges over the next year, that we recognize that you can't just wholesale make all these changes. So we're comfortable with that, working with that, and we know it's going to be a longer term process. But I just wanted to give a real story here briefly from Dr. Godwin's college. And this is a story not necessarily about creating a student business or working with students in the classroom, but it's a way to look at assets that the college held and something that it seemed like the community wanted, but it was a leaderless issue, right? And I mean, it just needed some action and maybe a look at what was available. So could you tell the story about the trail? You can just say it briefly, because I think this illustrates some actions and then how you couldn't have really planned it from the beginning to the end what that would happen, because you needed to take the actions which then allowed other people to have something to respond to. So could you start telling us what you had at hand to work with in the challenge?
The emphasis there, Heather, is on the action. You know, most of us start from a NACCE perspective of looking the student as entrepreneur, and then how we connect into community entrepreneurs, and then how our college functions entrepreneurially and how we think about that. But the reference to our trail, we had on our campus, we had a portion of about a 16-mile trail that had been developed by some people in the community who thought that would be a cool idea, and I think somebody put up $500 or something. So it had a little portion there, but it didn't really go anywhere or do anything, and it was just there. Had some problems to it. So really looking at the assets of our college and what we had an opportunity to say, our bird in hand was, we have this trail. It doesn't go anywhere. Nobody uses it. It doesn't make any sense. So what can we do with it? And what's the worst case scenario in terms of our affordable loss if our efforts toward bringing a trail, promoting fitness, we have a beautiful little campus. What's the worst case? Well, we still would have like an ugly trail that goes nowhere. I mean, so what can happen? And here's how I think about affordable loss. I'll make this as a footnote. As an entrepreneur myself, I would bring in my teams and my own businesses, and here was my question, and I didn't call it affordable loss, but it's like, okay, guys, if we go down this path, is this just going to delay my being able to pay off my mortgage, or am I going to be living in a washing machine box under the bridge? Now, to me, that's affordable loss. It just explains it all. But so we determined that, and we really made the ask. We went back to the people that originally built the trail. And then we went to the city because the trail is near the reservoir. And we learned from that, guess what? The city had a little trail that was ugly and went nowhere, but it was close to ours. And then the local firefighters have a workstation near our campus. Guess what? They had an ugly little trail that didn't go anywhere. And we had some fitness teams and the Dan River Basin River Association and our local YMCA that was looking for places to do 5K runs. And when you put all those these were crazy partners. They were not just crazy quilts. I mean, we realized that by going in and building very small trailheads, we have a 47-mile fitness trail around our campus that connects all those things together. The downside, really, the limits eliminated. It really was a safety issue from my perspective. I was thinking, we've got these 16 miles, there's no signage, there's no markers, there's no anything. We need to figure out how to get rid of that trail. And instead, it's become a part of a major community asset. So we looked at what we did control. We controlled 16 miles of an ugly trail that went nowhere. In a beautiful environment with a need from our community. So I thought our trail was a really a great example, something very simple that was a waste. Our bird in hand was not getting anywhere, that is now a wonderful little asset in our. And if you go on YouTube and Google PHCC Hidden Treasures, you can see the story of the trail.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin. I do like that story because it is a simple one, and it's something that's there and existing. And until you took that action, you wouldn't have known that the fire station. You wouldn't have.
We didn't know any of that.
Right. So and that's really the idea. It's like you by putting out these asks and by starting these actions, when you go back to your college, you'll start to learn about things that you didn't know, and then all of that will start to be knitted together. So Mike, I'm gonna close off, I guess, this question, and then we can just kind of talk about this a little bit. What is, and I'll probably ask the same question of each of you, what are some things that you hope to accomplish with this year's pitch winners, these colleges? What are you hoping to see? What would you be happy with at the end of the day? And not just so people can be afraid if they'll get funding next year, but I just mean from a fulfillment perspective of you as a funder and you as a person who's been in this field and been observing these things, what would bring you satisfaction to see?
Well, we've been doing pitch contests for a long time and really didn't put a whole lot of framework around it. We were trying to create some buzz and some excitement on individual campuses and try to help that champion go home with a little check and try to grow their program. And then in working with you, it really was more about advancing the NACCE point of view and getting to think a little bit more intentionally about what we were doing. In looking at what we talked about last night and effectuation, certainly to be able to see that the winners really are practicing the effectuation, that are taking advantage of the development that'll be offered during the coming year, to move more toward kind of a train the trainer so that they can talk about that kind of thing on campus with some really impact, and to see whether, we don't want this to be a flash in the pan, a one-year wonder where boy, didn't we have fun and we framed it up in 1 year like that, and then see the results of the asks over the next year and see what kinds of people the winners are interacting with that they hadn't done before, and to hear from the membership overall what kind of impact, what have they done with that? Tom was warning us all not to go back and fall into our Monday morning routine. We have a great opportunity here to try to push back on that. So that just the call to action and the demonstrations of what they learned about utilizing the framework.
Excellent, thank you. And now, Dr. Godwin, I know you actually were one of the colleges that did the pitch, but what do you hope to see, not just from your college, but from this whole network of community colleges that we have here today?
Well, we learned so much from each other, and most of us, I think if you put every community college president or administrator in the room with their faculties and staff, they would all tell you that we're grappling over many of the same things. Urban, rural, we're not that different. We have some of the same challenges. And so what I would love to see is that between now and next year, we have the implosion of this, of real action from last year. Quite frankly, I spent over a decade outside. I'd been a community college president before and left and worked in the private sector. And one of the things that turned me off was I was sick of hearing the flavor of the day and let's go chase the next jargon about higher education, and it was chasing a pot of money for a grant with no clue how that was going to bring long-term change and meaning and value to my college or where I was working. And so I think we have a lot of similar issues, and I would love to see it really move from the talking about the thinking to the driving of replicating what we see in the actions. I think that's what's so exciting about this. And we have I'm not sure we really have a whole lot of choices. Those of you that are performance funding, if your public dollars are like ours, if you're primarily privately funded, then you're going to have to start acting like that anyway. So this just gives us a framework. We can be in control of this, and it takes the victim and the weakness out of it. We don't have to be emotionally and financially fragile. We can use this framework to make, and I hope that happens this year very dramatically.
I love that. I love that because it puts us ahead of the curve, right? So we're not just responding and reactionary, but it puts us in control. Sara, what would you like to have happen. I just have to say this one thing. When Saris was here, it cracked me up after her presentation, and she listened to some of the conversations, and she was just like, what has NACCE done? She could not believe how much this audience was already, internalizing it. And I think that speaks to the simplicity of it, and it's that, wait a minute, this is something that we knew already, and now it just gives us the words, all the way from, the Chancellor Lambert, folks on our board, faculty. So what do you hope to accomplish? Because you've been in more of the corporate space working with them. This is an introduction really for you, for the community college. So what do you see as what would be successful for you?
I think I would echo a lot of the things that Dr. Godwin and Mike said here on the stage. I think what I would like to see is that shift in attitudes and actions. I'd like to see the community colleges really internalizing this idea that they do have tremendous assets and wealth at their disposal. And one of the things that I hear at the end of the master class, and that often seems revelatory as I talk with people, is, wow, we have so much within our students. And how can we pull our students in more as part of our crazy quilt? How can we use our students more as part of our bird in hand? So I think continuing down that path and recognizing that you're working together in partnership with your students and building, like you are co-creating your future and their future. It's together, it's combined, and there's tremendous power in combining these two forces here. So I think bringing that next year, and I think also next year I would love to hear successes and failures, because that would mean that you're out there really trying this mindset. And at the end of the day, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not entrepreneurial mindset or causal thinking. It's entrepreneurial mindset and causal thinking. That's the reality of being in a large environment. And so part of what needs to be figured out is what works in our environment. Where do we integrate? It's a continuum, and you're going to have to work to figure out where it makes the most sense to apply effectual thinking versus causal thinking, and transitioning between the two. And that's part of the skill, and that's part of the practice that I'm confident you'll get over time.
Excellent. One thing I wanted to comment on about that really struck me last year was someone in the master class had said to Saris, well, you did this study only with expert entrepreneurs that were successful. Do you think you would pull the same information out of failed entrepreneurs? And her response was so enlightening, because she said, they're the same people, right? She said, there's not a failed entrepreneur. It's the failure of an idea, but the person is the same. And so you have these failed ideas, and then you change, and then you have successes, and then you fail again, and you have successes. And so you're the same person. And I think that was really interesting, because it stops us from putting people into camps. And it allows us to think of anyone can do this, and they can do it by starting these small actions. And ultimately, it becomes a choice. Do they want to apply that in a job that they take, or do they want to apply that in the self-employment that they take on? So the outcome is whatever their choice is. But the failure and success is something that doesn't have to define the person. It's just part of that process.
And Heather, we had that aha moment from the master class that we shared yesterday, because that was who we added to our crazy quilt. We have entrepreneurs in our community who completely failed. Their businesses went belly up, they went bankrupt, many of them went back into some kind of traditional business world. We have never really thought about bringing them to the table, so that's our new addition to our crazy quilt, are those former entrepreneurs that the spirit is still there. They just have changed where they're at. And I think it's very important that we look at our students as the bird in hand. If there's the number one action for Patrick Henry Community College and the team we brought here is that the student becomes more than just a part of the crazy whip. The student is truly the bird in hand, and really changing the roles that students can play in this. Even for us, our student activities groups come and basically give me a list every year of what they want. And so it's like, here, we need this. So we need this money for you to go fix it. Starting in the spring, our student activities, they're going to pitch for their ideas, for what they want, what they think the college needs, for all the student groups, the organizations and clubs. We think letting them pitch them would be a way to have, so they have true ownership, and they really can then lead the enterprise. And we just become a part of the solution. We become a part of their crazy quilt.
You know, maybe there's a latent group. I was just thinking when you said that about what maybe people perceive themselves as being the failed entrepreneurs, but maybe it's just that they stopped at that point in time. And so by honoring the attempt and, you know, bringing them in and maybe partnering with them in some way and having them have a meaningful voice, you know, within your college and within communities can actually inspire them to take that label off of themselves. It's interesting. Mike, did you have something else you want to say?
You know, I just wanted to make one point, in that, you know, we don't often get a chance to stand up in front of the whole group and say thank you. You're, in our mind, you have always been an important part of what entrepreneurship is all about. You're certainly not the stepchild of this whole movement. You're a driver of what goes on. And as far as the Coleman Foundation is concerned, you have always been where the rubber meets the road. And so all that being said, we still have an awful lot of opportunity and an awful lot of work, but I just wanted to on behalf of the foundation, thank you for what you're going to go back and do tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that, and the asks and the frustrations and tearing up the crazy quilt and starting all over again, and it's what we have to do. And Heather, thank you for what NACCE has done to move this along.
Thank you, Mike. You know, I'm just going to... I was just going to close the panel out on what NACCE hopes to see from the colleges that have done the pitch. And so what we really want is we want the stories, but we don't want the stories like a report at the end of the quarter where you don't remember what the actual process was. We want the stories as they're happening. So we're devising some plans on how to get that, but we want to know, what was your first step when you got back? Who did you talk to? What was your ask? And then from that person, did they bring any more resources to the table? And then who did they talk to? And then what happened? Like, we want the dots, A, B, C. And the reason we want that is because then we want to be able to share that with the whole network. So as they're going back, and maybe other colleges, they just need some inspiration, they can look at some of these stories and see how it unfolded, not conceptually, but very tactically. So there are some very specific examples for that. So that's something that we'll be working on with the cohort. So with that, I'm sure now you probably really want to know who the winning colleges are. So I'm going to invite to the stage Clark McCain from the Coleman Foundation, and he's going to speak a little bit about the process and then let us know who those colleges are. Clark?
Great. Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everyone. We've arrived at what I think is a hoop it up moment. It's a hoop it up moment here for the next 10 minutes. All right. Cam, right on cue there. Yeah, I got my orange NACCE hat because this is a hoop it up moment. Now, we started out Wednesday morning listening to Dr. Sara Sarasvathy about effectuation, about how the entrepreneurial method can be used by community colleges to solve problems. And the 2014 Entrepreneurial College in Action competition called for applicants to submit proposals describing how they would implement the President's for Entrepreneurship Pledge action steps, those 5 things that NACCE is telling us that we need to do using effectuation, the 5 principles that explain how we do those things. So 5 action steps, 5 principles equals 10. We had 10 finalists invited to the master class on Sunday who yesterday presented an overview of their proposals to show how effectuation could be used to advance those goals. So could I ask for the list of the 10 finalists to be put on screen? These are our 10 finalists. Mike and Heather kind of talked a little bit about our goals. I want to just briefly recap that. We really have pretty simple goals with respect to this competition. We want to see effectuation in action. We want to test to make sure that those steps are effective means to advance self-employment on campus. And we want to capture fantastic stories, the good stories, the challenging stories, the real stories of how effectuation is implemented so that we can share those across the community. Now to show you how we at the foundation are going to behave effectually, I want to walk through those 5 principles as they relate to this competition. So first, the bird in hand. We as a funder, how do we look at the bird in hand? What do we have available to us? And there's obviously something you're all thinking of that is true. We do have resources to make available. But there's much more than that. And in philanthropy, you learn very quickly it's beyond the money that is really where the value is. And our relationships, new and old, are what we hold in our hands to advance this, whether it's a relationship with NACCE that we've had for a number of years, or with Sara, who we've just developed a relationship, and with all of you, the community at NACCE, who hopefully will look at what comes out of this competition as something of value. That's what we have as a bird in hand. Co-creation. We certainly know that we cannot achieve these goals independently as a foundation. We never can achieve any of our goals by ourselves. It's always through our grantees. And so this is the point in our past where we would be announcing winners. That's kind of what we've called this part of the show. But really, appropriately using effectuation, we're not going to announce the winners. We're going to invite our co-creators. So we'd like to invite to the stage to be our co-creators in this process each of these 10 college finalists. Each of these finalists are the winners in this competition. That's a hoop it up moment. All right. May I formally invite 1 or 2 representatives from each of these 10 colleges to come forward up these steps, and you'll be celebrated and welcomed by our panel. Some of you are already on the stage. And I'll read these names. Eastern West Virginia Community and Technical College, Fox Valley Technical College, Indian River State College, Ivy Tech Community College of Indiana, Kaskaskia College, Patrick Henry Community College, South Mountain Community College, Middlesex Community College, and Northeast State Community College. These are our 10 co-creators. Congratulations and welcome. However, that's only 2 of the principles. We have 3 more principles to go through. And so here they are. The affordable loss principle. We realized as we listened to presentations and we considered our goals that our affordable loss as a foundation exceeded the $150,000 that we've committed to these 10 colleges. We have more resource that we want to bear to prove out that effectuation is the right methodology and to show you precisely how you can employ it. Now, yesterday, as we were viewing presentations, we'll be very honest, there were a few lemons here and there. While every proposal, we believe, indicated that within it there were opportunities to apply effectuation, it was pretty clear that perhaps we don't understand it as thoroughly as we might need to employ it. So we have some lemonades there. We need to respond to that and make sure that we have the resources and the ability to effectively apply these tools to advance our goals. So therefore, as the pilot in the plane, we're making some changes to control the outcome a little bit better. What we're going to do is ask that each of these colleges think again about their plans. Sara will be providing a critique of what they've proposed, a critique that comes from the perspective of effectuation. We're going to ask each of them to respond to that within 30 days and give us modified plans or something that reflects the wisdom that they've heard regarding effectuation. From those revised plans, and everybody's still going to get their $15,000, from those revised plans, we are going to identify a subset of these 10 colleges that really are high potential areas for effectuation, high potential opportunities for us to see our goals realized, and we're going to provide additional consulting support and additional assistance to those colleges so that they can really apply this appropriately. So we congratulate everyone on the stage. We look forward to a very exciting several months here moving forward, and hopefully next year we'll have many great stories to share with each of you. So if I can ask everyone to exit stage right, and we'll just kind of hang out in front of the screen for a few minutes. Thank you.